joining us, and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the Data Act. This is something that we've been working on for a while. It really continues Ohio's long tradition of being an innovator, really a modernizer when it comes to transparent and honest and accessible elections. That's something that we're proud of in Ohio, and something that this will absolutely continue that long-held precedent. It's important to start off with defining what is the problem. What is the problem that we're attempting to solve for here? It starts with a few things. I think that we're all aware that there is a crisis of confidence. That's not hyperbole. Too many of our fellow Ohioans, really too many of our fellow Americans, lack the confidence that they should have in our elections. There are a variety of reasons for that. Some is based on just false information. Others are based on lack of transparency and the inability to access the data that they need. And that's really what this solves for. This is not a new problem, however. This was addressed in the Civil Rights Act of 1960. And I'm going to quote from that. In that landmark legislation, it says, "Every officer of election shall retain and preserve for a period of 22 months, almost 2 years, from the date of any general, special, or primary election, all records or papers which come into his possession." I think that that is a lofty goal, and it's one that candidly for many years we've fallen short of for a variety of reasons. One is that statute was written in an analog era, and obviously we live in a digital age when in many cases these are digital records. Because of modern IT systems, some of these records get overwritten, maybe even on a daily basis. And so when the new record is added into the archival system, the old record disappears into the ether. That's a problem because there's not a snapshot in time that you can go back to, for example, and find out who were all of the registered voters in this jurisdiction as of a particular date. In many cases, that's not available. In many cases, states have done little, if anything, to codify the retention of electronic election related records. We have boxes, banker boxes full of stuff at any county board of elections, but the question of archiving that electronic data has in many cases been kind of left unanswered. There are inconsistent standards for defining voter data. It's a question of, do we even all speak the same language about what constitutes a registered voter, what constitutes a voted ballot? But all of these kind of things are various across not only Ohio's 88 counties, but across the 50 states and the really thousands of jurisdictions that conduct elections in this country. There are no clear guidelines on how and for how long electronic voter data should be stored. I've used this example as I've been explaining this to other secretaries around the country and talking to our county boards of elections here. Imagine for a second a scenario where you were looking to invest in a company. You want to consider where you're going to put your retirement savings. But if we lived in a world where there were no generally accepted accounting principles or where there weren't standard charts of accounts, you wouldn't be able to compare two different companies' financials and make any sense of it. You wouldn't be able to make an apples to apples comparison if we didn't have that. Thankfully, we have that. We have generally accepted accounting principles. We have standard charts of accounts, standard definitions so that you can look at financial data and it makes sense. The same doesn't apply when it comes to elections. You can look at two different counties' sets of data, and there's really no way to compare the two or analyze them. And that's a problem. What this bill will do is really codify those standard definitions and set up the accounting principles, if you will, for how we maintain election data. And that's the solution that we've devised, the Data Act. I first want to thank the folks that have been involved in helping put this together. First and foremost, Senator Gavarone, who's long been a leader on election issues in the state Senate. I appreciate her work as well as her staff, the team from LSC, who always does tremendous work. But also, we've worked with the stakeholders here. We've talked to our boards of elections. We've had repeated meetings with the very diverse different boards of elections. Some of our boards of elections are 2 people that work at the county courthouse, and we've got boards of elections with well over 100 on staff. And so we've worked to take into consideration the needs that various boards of elections have. We've worked with the data team at MIT, obviously an impressive institution that has helped secretaries of state over the years as well. I had great conversations last week when we were in Washington for the National Association of Secretaries of State. And to be clear, when I've talked to other secretaries around the country about this, they are interested in bringing this model to their state. So something that's starting here in Ohio could end up becoming the gold standard once again for what other states want to do. I also want to recognize AFPI, America First Policy Institute. Steve Smith is the chief of staff there, a fellow Ohioan. He came in for this because they've been helping with the development of this as well. So what does this bill do? Very simply, 4 bullet points. Codifies standard definitions for key election data. Codifying those standard definitions for key election data is important so that post-election results can actually be analyzed and you can do that apples-to-apples comparison that you want to do. The second thing, creates within the Secretary of State's office an Office of Data Analytics and Archives, which will serve as that clearinghouse for retention and review. This is that transparency piece. There is nothing to hide at a Board of Elections and in elections administration generally. It all is an open book, and this new subset within our office will make sure that that data is available for any Ohioan, any American, any journalist, anybody that wants to look at that and analyze it. Third, publish standardized data and results online. Again, putting it out there for all the world to see. And finally, something that has candidly been a frustration for our county boards of elections and for the Secretary of State's office for years is it codifies a process for election data to be transferred from the county boards of elections to the Secretary of State's office. Currently, it's a pretty cumbersome process. We're constantly surveying them, asking them for things, making sure that they're defined so that they're giving us the right data. Comes in the form of a bunch of spreadsheets from county boards of elections. This would be standardized throughout this process so that when County X or when County Y reports data to us, it's all in the same format and it's all comparable. I want to give an example of a real life issue that happened here in Ohio in 2018 that could have been avoided if we had something like this in place. And this happened in the 2018 election, gubernatorial election in Miami County. I was faced with a difficult surprise on my 3rd day in office when it was a member of our staff going through the election data from the election that had occurred almost 2 months before that and found an anomaly, found that there was something that didn't add up. The columns didn't add up, the numbers didn't match up. Well, we dug a little deeper and we found that that county, Miami County, had failed to count over 6,000 votes. Now, nothing malicious, obviously. If there had been, there would have been criminal charges, but a sloppy error made by the County Board of Elections resulted, I think from a voting machine not being shut down correctly, resulted in 6,000 votes not counting. Now, again, by the grace of God, that didn't result in any changes in the who won and who lost. I mean, all the same election results that had been announced as part of the canvass still held. But there's no reason why we should have only discovered that in January, again, 3 days into a new office. With the kind of transparency that the Data Act would provide, that kind of thing would stick out like a sore thumb. It would become immediately visible to everybody involved that there was a problem there and that remedial steps need to be taken. Again, this is an example of Ohio leading the way. This is something that should be embraced by both Republicans and Democrats because it's all about making sure that the public is empowered with accurate data so that they can look at how elections are run and have confidence in knowing that when the elections are over, that it was the true voice of the people that was heard in an honest election and one that they can trust. And so with that, proud to introduce my partner in this, Senator Gavarone, who has today introduced the Data Act. Senator?
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for being here today. As many of you have heard or seen in writing from me, improving in the integrity and confidence in our elections has been a paramount priority of mine. You saw that in the very first bill I sponsored in the Senate, Senate Bill 52 in the 133rd General Assembly with the help of Secretary of State Frank LaRose. We significantly enhanced the post-election auditing process in Ohio. And you saw that last year in House Bill 458 when I wrote the new law that, among other improvements, for the first time ever, requires Ohioans to provide a valid photo ID to vote. Giving Ohioans more information, in particular data about their elections, it's really important to both of us. We got this process started a little early by House Bill 458 by requesting data that has never been required to be given to the public. For instance, when the Secretary of State's office requests funding to send out absentee ballot applications to all eligible voters, they're going to provide data that includes the number of applications mailed, the number of those that were returned as undeliverable, the number of applications that were completed and returned, and the number of absentee ballots cast by mail. House Bill 458 also included a requirement that county boards of elections report to the Secretary of State the number of absentee ballots received by personal delivery and, if a board chooses to utilize a drop box, the number of ballots received by a drop box. That information will then be disseminated to Ohio's voters. But Secretary LaRose and I believe there's more information that we could and should give the public access to. That's where the Data Act comes in. This new legislation is going to further the work of informing Ohio's citizens about how our elections are run. I was actually talking to Secretary LaRose, his staff, and my staff about, how this bill is going to make Ohio a national leader, not just in creating an office that is solely designed to retain, analyze, and publish election data, but in voter transparency as well. Standard definitions included in the legislation like voter history and voter registration date is vital data that I believe the public should have access to. Currently, we can have up to 88 different versions of the way data is inputted. 88 different possibilities. This legislation at its core is going to standardize the data entry process, which will save boards of elections time, money, and most importantly, will better ensure that we have clean voter rolls. It's tough to cheat in elections in Ohio, but voter fraud, including dead people voting, non-citizens trying to register, and double voting, it's happened. It's happened here in Ohio. Having good data to help clean the voter rolls will help make it even tougher to cheat and result in better elections and improved voter confidence. Quite simply, there's a trust deficit in our elections right now, both in Republican and Democrat circles. Secretary LaRose has run the best elections in the country. But I believe that if we're not actively working on ways to improve our elections, then we're moving backwards, and we're just asking for trouble. Giving Ohioans access to data we can make readily available is the right thing to do. And it's why I've teamed up with Secretary LaRose to work on this legislation. I thank you again for being here to cover what I've been told is a first of its kind legislation in this country, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Senator. Before we go to questions, one other member of our team I want to recognize, Amanda Grandjean, who has been taking point on this work in our office. She's a senior advisor on elections issues with our team, and so thank you, Mandy, for all that you've done. Happy to answer any questions that you all have.
So the data, some of the things you're describing, your office has always put out historically through press releases or just internal number crunching, or explain to us what you're doing now and how this would change that.
Yeah, Julie, let me start by saying condolences for the loss of your colleague, and definitely keeping his family in our prayers. This has been a process over the years that involves us pulling data from the boards of elections, sometimes calling them and saying, hey, we haven't gotten your spreadsheet yet, you need to send it to us. That's not always well defined, sort of what goes in each column, and sometimes it's left to interpretation, and so it results in some garbage in, garbage out kind of problems, which is what data scientists will talk about. When you start with a bad data set, you're not going to be able to do any reasonable analysis of it. And so what we would do is pull data from the county boards of elections. It's a burden for them because when they're busy reporting to us, that's time away from them actually doing their work. And so we tend to do that on a weekly basis throughout the lead up to the election, and then post-election, it happens on the sort of routine when there's the final certification of votes and all those kind of things. This would standardize that, the definitions of it, the schedule for that, the methodology, even the technological way that they do it. So instead of just emailing us spreadsheets constantly and then us having to follow back up, they could report to us in real time, and we could keep that data fresh and accurate and make sure that it's transparently, revealed to the people of Ohio in a more timely and accurate way.
This new office that's considered in this legislation, what are the costs associated with that, and would it result in people being hired at the Secretary of State's office?
Yeah, it'll result in a few extra people, but not many. And the cost of actually doing that will be relatively minimal. We'll have a full cost when the bill makes its way through. I think we've sort of held a place right now for what the appropriation may be for that, but it'll be, I can tell you, something that we will keep as minimal as possible. But this is one of those things that it's worth investing in. And I think that the people of Ohio expect and want to have this kind of transparency, and for us to be able to provide that, I think is money well spent.
You talked about 88 different ways that some of the stuff is handled. The tradition has been for counties to make decisions on voting machines and things like that. So is the Ohio Association of Elections Officials on board? Do you have all these counties on board with this kind of standardizing and taking away their way that they're doing it?
Karen, thanks for the question, and it's a good one because the decentralized nature of Ohio's election is a feature, not a glitch, right? It's intentional that we have it very decentralized. It's 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats in each county that are local and that have the concerns of that community in mind when they do their work of running the election. And so what this bill would do is not take away any of their autonomy, but really take away a headache that they have right now of how do they report to us, what are the definitions of it, you know, to make sure, they want to make sure that they're passing good information to us so that I can then aggregate it on a statewide basis, because I don't have a dashboard where I can say how many absentee ballots were cast in County X today. That doesn't exist. I have to ask them to report that to me and then total that up and report it to the whole state. This would streamline some of this. And so the election officials that we've talked to are excited about this. This takes a burden off of their plate, lessens a burden anyway that they currently have. It doesn't really change any of their autonomy in their daily operations, but it streamlines a process that they recognize needs to happen. Now, as far as whether the Ohio Association of Elections Officials as a group has endorsed this, they haven't had a meeting to discuss this and form a position. I'm confident that they will, though, from the interactions that we've had with their executive board, with several of their members. There's pretty broad excitement about this among the election officials.
And I'd like to add to that, what this bill does is it creates standard definitions that aren't currently in place. So we have 88 boards of elections, but they may have 88 different interpretations of what data history is, for example. So we want to make sure we're standardizing that so we are all speaking the same language so that this data is consistent and reliable and people know what they're talking about when they mention certain terms.
Let me provide an example, because maybe it seems a little esoteric until you can give a hypothetical. And it seems like, well, okay, a ballot's a ballot, a vote's a vote, a registered voter's a registered voter. Well, maybe not necessarily, and these things get pretty complex. For example, how about a registered voter who is in inactive status? Is that the same as a registered voter who's in active status? Well, okay, how about a ballot that's cast? There are times that a voter will come into their polling location, they'll get their ballot, not when either of us are on it, but they'll say, none of these candidates are exciting to me, and they'll turn in a blank ballot. I mean, and so does that count as a cast ballot or not, right? How about a provisional ballot? When a voter comes in and there's something wrong with their registration information and they're given a provisional ballot, does that count as a ballot cast that day or not until after they've come back to the Board of Elections to rectify that issue and prove their identity? There are different interpretations of these things across different counties, and it results in unusable data. And that's what we're trying to do, is standardize these definitions so everybody's singing off the same song sheet, and when they report X number of people have voted today, it means the same thing all throughout the state.
Secretary, does the software currently exist? And if so, where are the servers going to be kept? Who's going to be guarding those servers? What sort of things are there for protection of those servers?
Yeah, great question. I think in many ways this would be something, well, let's also talk about this. Because of the decentralized nature of Ohio's elections, there are various different vendors that provide the voter registration databases that our counties rely on. I think there are 4 of them, 4 main vendors, because the counties get to choose who's going to provide their voter registration database that they use. So in many cases, what we're talking about is an API from their existing database so that we can draw that data out and then have it talk to us, right? Because that's what you want the data to do, is to tell you a story. So these are existing databases where we would build with our IT team, maybe in-house, maybe we contract this out. It would be a cost-benefit analysis on that. The API that would pull that data out of their current voter registration database that they're already used to using. They know how to use it. That's where they, as we speak, are inputting new registered voters or updating people's names or addresses or whatever else, and pull it out of those existing databases. When it comes to security, I think this is something that we do not compromise on. Ohio has set the standard when it comes to the cybersecurity work that we've done. This is not me talking. This is what the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has told other states to follow the Ohio model. And so we are very purposeful about protecting that kind of data. Whether it's on a server or more likely a cloud-based system, those redundancies and backups would be in place, as well as the human aspect of this. Because one of the most important things, you can have all the great firewalls in the world, but if you don't have people that are well trained to maintain the security of those systems, then it's not worth a thing. We constantly require training for not only our staff, but for our county boards of elections on simple things about not clicking on a link that gets emailed to you and protecting the integrity of your databases. So that's something that would be built in from the very beginning to everything that we do in this.
Trying to anticipate
Yeah.
when we get back to our offices, the criticisms of this. One might be that this is sort of a dream come true for national groups that want to find election flaws and file lawsuits and sort of undercut the current election system, you know, because they did try to do this in a lot of states and weren't able to efficiently get stuff. So it was
Yeah.
a very cumbersome process. Is that a piece of this?
So, Julie, it's a good question. I would put forth the supposition that when people look behind the curtain, what they're going to see is how well run our elections are. The problem is that the current ambiguity, the current lack of transparency in some ways breeds those conspiracy theories that are often not based in reality, right? And it causes people to sort of fixate on some of these things that may not actually be where the problem is. To the extent that there are problems with voter fraud, they're generally, you know, in the single digits of somebody casting a ballot on behalf of a deceased relative or forging a signature on a petition or whatever else. And those are things that we investigate and we catch. But this at scale idea that thousands or tens of thousands or you know, many hundreds of thousands of fraudulent votes are occurring. I believe that when you have the transparency that this provides, it would show people that it's not actually the case. And guess what? If it is the case, then there does need to be action. And so again, you can't be afraid of transparency because it's the best disinfectant, right? If there is something systemically wrong with our elections, and I don't believe there is, but this bill would show that. Yeah.
No, and it really goes down to voter confidence and making sure if voters have access to this data and they can see what's happening, it's going to greater improve their confidence in our elections. And I believe greater participation in the election process.
Good. That's a great point, Senator. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, in the charged political environment that exists around elections administration these days, there is this binary choice that people offer where they say, well, you can either have convenience or security. I reject that. I think that you can have convenient elections that are also secure. And the end result, the net result of that is higher levels of participation. When people are confident in their elections, when they know that there is efficacy in the ballot box, when they know that their voice will be heard and that will make a difference in how their state or nation is governed, they're more likely to participate. And so something like this can really help drive increased participation and confidence at the same time.
Does this have anything to do with the electronic registration information center, Eric?
No, not really, although that's one of the tools that we use to maintain accurate voter lists.
You're staying in Eric, it's Eric's day, right?
Yes, indeed. And there have been some conversations just recently about the future of that organization. My team has been actively involved in that. I know that there are concerns that some secretaries have, and like any human endeavor, there are imperfections to that organization. And, you know, some of the people involved, I think have caused concern for others. But I can tell you that it is one of the best it's one of the best fraud fighting tools that we have when it comes to actually catching people that try to vote in multiple states, when it comes to maintaining the accuracy of our voter rolls by removing those that move out of state. That's a thing that Eric helps provide. And so to me, it's a tool that has provided great benefit for us, and we're going to continue to use it.
When you talk about a trust deficit, do you feel like people have that trust deficit because, and this can fix it, or is it because of some of the talking points that people in your own party have been saying? Is the message need to come not from data, but from some party leaders?
Well, the best antidote to falsehoods is truth, and copious amounts of it, and that's what an act like this can provide. Listen, questioning the integrity of elections is nothing new. It's come from both sides of the aisle. It happened in 2016, it happened in 2018, and it happened in 2020. And it's happened going back in our history as well. Again, one of the best things that we can do to prevent that kind of thing, so that I have a saying, and you've heard me say this before, Karen, we run our elections so well that the loser knows they lost. And it sounds negative until you think about it. That really is the goal of a transparent and stately and organized election, is that there's this magical thing about 11 o'clock on election night where the winner goes and gives a victory speech, and the loser hopefully calls and congratulates the winner because they recognize, hey, listen, I tried hard, I came up short, this was an honest election. And with this kind of transparency created by the Data Act, I think we'll have more of that, and getting back to more of that, where people know, hey, listen, I won or I lost, but either way, it was the true voice of the people of Ohio that was heard, and something I can be confident in, win or lose.
At 11 o'clock on election night?
That's the goal. That's the goal.
Is this related at all to the speed of the count, or is it
Unrelated.
unrelated?
The tabulation of results on election night is something Ohio has done well. I have offered a little tough love for some of our other states around the country that maybe need to take a cue from how Ohio does this. For example, pre-processing absentee ballots so that they're not counting for days and days after the election. We don't go home until all the results are tabulated and released on election night. So what that means is every ballot that's in our possession, if it's at a county board of election, an early vote, an absentee vote, we count those and we release those on election night. That usually means that we're at the office until about 3 or 4 a.m. But when Ohioans go to bed or when they wake up the next morning, they can know what those election night results are, and for that matter, how many outstanding ballots there still are to count, because of course there will be overseas military ballots still coming in, or absentee ballots that are still making their way through the Postal Service, or for that matter, those provisional ballots. And so we release on election night not only how many votes the winner got, how many votes, or how many votes the front runner got, how many votes the challenger got, but also how many outstanding ballots there are to count. That gives you the denominator, if you will, so that you can take a look at that and decide if those election night results are conclusive or not, or if you're going to need to wait longer for those absentees and provisionals and all of that to be remedied.
One more question, if there are any questions.
Anything else? All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Senator, appreciate you.
Thank
you so
you.
much. Yeah.